the first viable personal computer with a programming language anyone could use.
The Apple II was the very first time ever you pulled a machine out of a box and turned it on, and bing, it had a programming language.
I remember the day at the club meeting that he brought the Apple II in, because it was the first time I couldn't get close to it. I mean, it was like I had to fight my way to see what was going on. It was stunning to look down there and see only a handful of chips, and how the hell did he do this?
Suddenly, the little computer kit business had an entirely different potential, and that was quickly recognized by an engineer looking to back new ventures. Mike Markkula had heard about what was going on in Steve Jobs' garage, so he went to visit.
Woz was sitting at a workbench working on what would become the Apple II. And so I stopped and stuck my nose into that, and I went, gee, Merry Christmas, this is the right kind of thing to get the personal computer business started.
In January of 1977, Markkula put up $300,000 and became Apple's first CEO. The only hitch was Wozniak, the brains behind Apple, was still working for Hewlett-Packard.
I was scared to start a company. I wasn't a company runner. I wanted to design computers and write software, and I told him that's all I wanted, and I want my job forever at Hewlett-Packard, so I wouldn't start Apple. And Steve just got all my relatives and friends to call me, and finally I found one other friend that was willing to say, do this to get rich.
Woz and Jobs eventually moved out of the garage and into real offices. The Apple II got a sleek plastic housing, and Markkula hired an advertising firm to promote its uses in offices and homes. Together they brought the Apple II to the general public for the first time at the 1977 West Coast Computer Fair in San Francisco. There, while Steve Wozniak stayed in the background, Steve Jobs took center stage.
I think we took that show by storm, and the computer itself was just exactly what everybody wanted. It just was a huge hit.
You couldn't get near their booth. It was wall-to-wall people.
At the end of the show, Mike Markkula put his hand around me and said, Steve, this thing's going to happen. We are going to be a $500 million company.
There was a palpable feeling of magic in the air, that we were doing things that no one else had done before. We were doing things that would be great. We were doing things that would change the world.
Soon the Apple computer became the first to successfully cross into small businesses, schools, and homes. In their first year, the company took in nearly $800,000, surpassing all expectations, and Apple's future looked bright. Steve Wozniak was flying high. Unbelievable wealth and fame were just around the corner. Steve couldn't imagine how any of this could go bad, but he was about to find out. In 1978, Steve Wozniak was on a roll. His Apple II was a wild success as the first commercial personal computer, and every few months Steve came up with improvements to make it even better. No other computer in this brand new field could hold a candle to it. And while Steve Jobs got the publicity, Steve Wozniak's engineering brilliance made him a legend to the slide ruler set.
For Woz, designing the Apple II was an act of love, and at least for people like me, shone through the screen. You could tell that this thing was not only was it crazy, twisted, and brilliant, but it was an act of love.
Steve Wozniak was a brilliant engineer, and he was able to do amazing things. So, for example, in the days when we wanted to add a disk drive, a floppy disk drive to the Apple II computer, other people's electronic circuitry took 70 integrated circuits. His took 6. That is incredible.
He was able to make the software stand on its head and go through incredible contortions. It's the work of a genius, but it's also the work of a madman.
I went in late at night, night after night after night. When the last technicians left at 2 in the morning, I left at 4. You know, I'm still in this little game against me at my best. I'm playing against Steve Wozniak at his best, and I've got to outdo him.
He was never more productive than at this time, but the late nights and obsession with Apple took a toll on Steve's relationship with his wife, Alice.
I think Alice kind of felt out of the loop. She was in the sidelines, and I think as Steve was so fully engaged with his true passion, which was inventing electronic devices, specifically the computer, Alice felt left out.
After 4 years of marriage, they divorced in 1979. And while his personal life suffered, his business partnership with Steve Jobs was never better. Wozniak designed the machines and Jobs did the packaging. By 1980, the two were media darlings, and on the strength of the Apple II's booming sales, they were ready to take their company public. On paper, the stock allocated to Jobs, Wozniak, and CEO Mike Markkula seemed to be split fairly. But Steve Wozniak didn't think so. He was concerned about Apple's employees, who he felt also deserved to share in the riches.
So he took some of his ample share of stock and invented a program that came to be known as the Woz Plan, where he gave sort of bonus amounts of stock to a few key people, but then he allowed anyone working at Apple before a certain time to purchase up to, say, 3,000 shares of stock, which ended up being worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to people.
Apple Computer's initial public offering in December of 1980 was the largest in Wall Street history, and Steve Wozniak was suddenly worth $50 million. His personal life also changed. He started dating an attractive accountant at Apple, Candy Clark. He now drove a flashy Porsche and bought a $200,000 private plane, which he learned to fly. He had no idea, though, how quickly his life was about to change yet once again. In February 1981, just 2 months after becoming a multimillionaire, Steve was ready to propose to Candy. For a romantic weekend to pick out their rings, Steve and Candy and 2 friends were going to fly in Steve's plane to San Diego. With Steve at the controls, the plane began its takeoff. Witnesses say it got airborne too quickly. A few seconds into the flight, the plane veered suddenly and crashed. All 4 passengers were badly hurt, but Steve and Candy had the worst injuries.